Lord of the Scarlet Forest and apex of the downpour, Uth Duna is the first of the wild's apexes encountered. With numerous turf wars, how does Uth Duna manage its role as top dog of the forest, with both the staunch competition it faces and the seasonal world it lives in? So to start off, perhaps the biggest question that lingers over all of the Monsters Inc. is just how they benefit from and live in their respective inclemencies. The downpour partially floods the region, as well as just generally having constant high rainfall, and for a large aquatic monster like Uth Duna, this could well aid in movement through the forest. Wading, swimming, or walking along the bottom is likely cheaper than just terrestrial walking, for a creature of Uth Duna's mass and morphology, and makes traversing its domain a lot faster and more efficient. But as well as this, it may also improve Uth Duna's foraging. To look at perhaps Uth's chiefest inspiration, the Arapaima, which exhibits similar behaviours in the flooded forests of South America, Arapaima will immediately follow rising floodwaters, and occupy flooded forests to forage. Its air breathing and morphology allows it to pick off moribund aquatic life in the hypoxic floodwaters, and to exploit untapped resources before most other fish, as well as predating the other hypoxia-tolerant fish that move to try and use the same resources as well. This may be the same for Uth Duna, who shares the same abilities to give it an edge over other aquatic life, and flooding forests may offer up a wealth of food between both stranded terrestrial animals and choking aquatic ones. With the extent of the downpour, it's unknown if the floodwaters are similarly hypoxic, though Uth Duna could be like other inclemency apexes and seemingly occupy a huge range, accounting for its occasional disappearance in the immediate maps. Some catchment areas may be less fed directly by the rain, and more by swollen water bodies, allowing for Uth's combination of lungs and gills to give it the edge over aquatic life it feeds on. Even if not, then Uth Duna may still use the downpour for foraging. Its considerable mass and clawed feet adapted to gain purchase and resist rapids may allow it to search freely in the seasonal rushing channels formed to snatch living things swept away in the torrents, without itself risking a similar fate. And this could take the forms of more active foraging, or situating itself in a waterfall with its mouth open, as crocodilians will often do to the delight of photographers going for a long exposure shot. The shallow waters in such areas may also allow Uth Duna to trap swimming animals against the shorelines, for an easy meal as well. Whilst Uth Duna is described as an apex predator, it's unknown if its diet is strictly animal protein. Arapaima will eat vegetable matter with some frequency in Guyana at least. And if similar, Uth Duna could also take advantage of the bounty of fruits, shoots and fungi, made accessible by the rains and floodwaters. The bounty of food combined with the possible expansions of territories, but leading to the same areas to access abundant resources, could lead to both a peacetime and a period of frequent encounters for Uth Duna as well. And they may also use the downpour for courtship and mating, much as Arapaima do, as well as just the most likely time to bump into the other of their kind, and be in a good mood. Inclemency apexes are also likely at their strongest and fittest in the inclemencies as well, and so courtship and mating may well occur at such times too. This is the case with Nuudra after all. Arapaima will also use the floodwaters to care for their young as well, but nothing is known of Uth Duna's parental care or even birth, and the Leviathans are generally quite a data-deficient group in that regard as well, with information only present on Mizutsune and Royal Ludroth, with a 50-50 split between Mizutsune's parental care and Ludroth's lack of. A related question also stems from Uth Duna's prominent fins, mainly what are they for? Which are a mucus and water combination supported by fine, cilia-like hairs growing from the tentacle-like bases. Whilst having some protective value against the hunter and their weapons, they don't do much against other monsters, and also don't cover especially vulnerable areas like the head or neck. But the fins do also add significant weight to the body, due to trapping copious amounts of water as well. And when combined with the scales canonically doing the same thing, this may notably change Uth Duna's movements, and especially in the downpour. In earlier videos, I suggested Leviathans may have denser limb bones like some animals to facilitate wading and swimming, and to overcome their own buoyancy. But new observations of Mizutsune fishing suggest otherwise, and that even large Leviathans can be positively buoyant with inflated lungs. So Leviathans wishing to dive or remain submerged may need notable adaptations to stay submerged, and not be burning energy and oxygen fighting their own buoyancy. The larger and more heavily armoured Lagiacrus appears to be neutrally buoyant, and so simply adding mass does seem to be one way to do it. Abyssal specimens may be so large they become negatively buoyant, and so can efficiently exploit deep-sea areas, or may use extra armour to reduce buoyancy as well. For Uth Duna, like a wetted sponge sinking, it may use its absorbent scales and water-trapped fins to make itself a lot heavier, so it can both withstand the surges of the downpour, but also forage underwater with less effort to stay submerged too. In the deep reservoirs of the forest, we see Uth Duna hunt large fish by even leaping after it. But in the smaller, shallower, tree-choked runs, Uth Duna could potentially forage along the bottom, rooting out freshwater crabs, amphibians, and bottom-dwelling fish that would still provide fine fare. The fins may also help when ascending to the surface again too, both full stop and when in pursuit of prey. The bizarre hammerhead of Diplocaulus and relatives has been suggested to be a hydrofoil, allowing it to swiftly and easily ascend in the water column for prey capture and general purpose. It could be suggested Uth Duna's fins could serve a similar purpose when in the water as well, having both several of them and being massive, but the counterpoint being them being made of flexible mucus against solid bone. But Uth Duna does seem to have the fins extended when swimming, and at high speeds too, and the rest of its morphology doesn't seem well suited for high-speed swimming. Even if not for lift, the fins may still help with manoeuvrability in the water and assisting it in its acrobatics. Because as said back in Lagiacrus and Plesioth's video, aquatic animals aren't made just to swim, and have other physiological needs with morphological requirements. And Uth Duna likely has a large chunk of its life on land too. As well as the inclemency allowing Uth Duna to better exploit the waterways, the absorbent nature of the scales and the fins holding moisture may also allow Uth Duna to venture far into the forest away from primary water bodies too. With the frequent rainfall letting Uth Duna release its inhibitions and feel the rain on its skin, this would keep it hydrated and healthy for days at a time, away from the chief water bodies, as well as allowing traversal between different ones too. This would allow Uth Duna to notably expand its territory and access inland resources. And for young Uth Duna, this would presumably be a vital time to facilitate long-distance dispersal to new areas away from their upbringing and related individuals. Overall, the impact of the downpour on Uth Duna and its abilities elevate its strengths and show it as more than just a river monster, and why it's deserving of the title of Lord of the Forest. Another interesting aspect of Uth Duna's morphology is the protrusible jaws. Seen in many fishes too, this overall became an evolutionary norm in many families as an adaptation to elusive prey and visual ability in fishes. Whilst Uth Duna's jaws aren't anywhere near as exaggerated as many fishes, this may represent a similar adaptation to either fast, agile, or well-hidden prey species that also live in the Scarlet Forest and the broken underwater terrain with a lot of refugia. As on top of this, in some species, protrusible jaws can seemingly increase ram speed in feeding, and in some cases could possibly be due to the lack of adaptation for flat ram speed in the postcranial morphology due to agility being selected for in a diverse underwater environment. Uth Duna may be similar in some aspects, and has both a heavily reduced tail compared to many other substrate-dependent leviathans, where it is very often a vital part of locomotion and producing velocity and acceleration, and very few adaptations for straight-line speed, but robust limbs that can be used to dig, grapple and push in dense underwater terrain, as well as being needed for all-important terrestrial locomotion too. The protrusible jaws may partially make up for a lack of straight-line speed underwater by assisting in ram velocity in feeding in a dense aquatic environment, and maybe as a result of this and Uth's other morphological traits not seen in other aquatic or substrate-dependent leviathans, leading to a unique set of jaws that function as a framework of compromise between speed and power. Protrusible jaws also allow for suction feeding, though this may be another reason why Uth Duna's jaws aren't as exaggerated as some fishes, due to the amount of shallow water or terrestrial foraging it does, where such features would be less helpful, as well as prey size. Though for quickly snapping up small prey as it forages along the riverbed, the addition of suction is likely a big help. With large fish in the diet and occasional tangles with other monsters that could potentially result in intraguild predation, Uth Duna's jaws may also not be able to protrude further due to a reduction in bite force this would likely cause. Even with Uth Duna's large size and robust limbs, that are often more used in combat than the jaws, It still needs to process prey after and still bite, meaning Uth Duna can't completely sell bite force down the Scarlet River. Uth Duna's dentition much more resembles something like that of a tigerfish than an arapaima, and part of this may stem from the latter being more omnivorous than first believed and having the adaptations for it. Whilst omnivory in Uth Duna shouldn't be counted out, it is likely more specialised towards predation and /or piscivory than its chiefest inspiration, and likely larger prey in whichever substrate it hunts in. But Uth Duna isn't the only fisher folk of the forest's waterways, and it shares the rivers and channels with a number of other leviathans. In a leviathan-heavy game, the Scarlet Forest seems to be a leviathan-heavy map, but is it actually? To look at the Scarlet and Flooded forests, both have equal numbers of leviathans present, and it does seem one could conclude that at press time leviathans reach their highest diversity in aquatic forests. On top of this, leviathan diversity is likely much more constrained at the medium level of mass than the higher ones. The Scarlet Forest has two small species of leviathan, the Garjos and the Pyragils, whereas in the Flooded Forest, this role is usurped completely by female Ludroth, who likely use numbers, sociality, and the support of the large male to dominate old world ecosystems and displace other small leviathans, whereas the larger ones can seemingly cohabitate with niche partitioning and general strength. The Scarlet Forest leviathans are presumably supported by a diverse environment and niche partitioning within it, as seen in aquatic predators. It's hard to say with just the map to gauge how much spatial partitioning occurs, but Uth Duna probably uses the entirety of the forest, with notable terrestrial use especially in the downpour, and it seems the Garjos prefer shallow channels with frequent terrestrial use themselves as well, whereas the Pyragils are more specialised to aquatic movement and hunting. The impact of the seasons is hard to call, but ironically the inclemency may actually reduce competition compared to the plenty. More land underwater and potentially more available food in fish form may result in just more space and resources and so less competition, whereas the plenty, even if the forest above may be blooming, could result in much more localised resources and so dominance of rich feeding spots by larger leviathans, resulting in either conflict or prey switching in the smaller ones. There may be some temporal partitioning too. The preferred prey of Uth Duna, the giant trevally, are noted as diurnal, and Uth Duna itself may be more of a diurnal hunter to catch them when they're active and out in the open. Mizutsune itself is often portrayed as being more nocturnal, presumably from how touch likely plays a big role in its foraging, and so Mizutsune may avoid competition with Uth Duna by being active at different times, taking the night shift to Uth Duna's day job. In terms of diet, the Garjos and Pyragils show flexibility in that they may group up to hunt large vertebrates like Dalthodon, but singly presumably subsist more on small fish. Mizutsune is seemingly the most specialised of the group, being chiefly a piscivore with little deviation reported, and it seems to consume mainly smaller fish on that note too, catching them in abundance. Whilst Mizutsune would presumably go for larger species too, it may be forced into eating smaller ones from competition with Uth Duna. This may also explain Mizutsune's odd fire abilities, in that regularly taking less profitable prey like bomb and burst arowana may cause it to synthesize flammable properties into the soapy secretion from eating their scales as well. But with that said, the comparative bounty of certain species may also keep Mizutsune afloat too, with the sushi fish being noted as exceptionally nutritious, and so may make prey switching a tenable option when going for prey with less biomass than the norm. The wet fish probably doesn't have much ecological impact though. Whereas Uth Duna consumes larger prey like Gajor and giant trevally, and as a very large-bodied leviathan, may only go for prey past a certain size to make them worth its while, and also presumably dabbles in terrestrial prey occasionally, what with being described as an apex predator of the region. As such, there will be overlap between all four. The relative flexibility and plasticity of the Leviathan Guild in the area allows for the occupying of different realised niches, and so the partitioning of resources that allows such diversity. It is worth noting at this point that Lagiacrus is apparently not a resident monster of freshwater ecosystems, and rather swims up from the coast upon detecting certain nutrient profiles in the water at the river mouth. As seafaring monsters, it's possible Lagiacrus periodically comes to drink fresh water at estuaries every few weeks, much as mosasaurs did, and may explore further inland upon detecting certain substances. So past instances of Lagiacrus in places like the flooded forest and misty peaks were likely vagrant individuals that had swam up rivers, indeed with quests describing as such too. And while present, it seems Lagiacrus can do a fair amount of damage, hence the reason for removal in the quest. Threatening the ecosystem is a phrase often bandied about in the Monster Hunter world, to the point of being near meaningless or a knee-jerk reaction, especially when combined with the validity of some quest descriptions. But a look at Lagiacrus's feeding behaviour shows this could possibly be the case in freshwater ecosystems. Lagiacrus engages in mass fish kills by trapping them in a created whirlpool before shocking an entire shoal and consuming the fish at leisure, which is ostensibly more efficient than pursuing them singly for a large-bodied animal. This destructive method of hunting in smaller water bodies, as well as the number of fish taken, could quickly start to destabilize freshwater ecosystems. Removal of certain and/or important species can have major ripple effects, with a good example coming from Yellowstone's waterways, where the invasive lake trout have taken over from the native cutthroat trout, as well as having significant impacts on nutrients, phytoplankton and invertebrates in the waterways. This even ripples out to large mammals and birds too, being a far less available resource to the terrestrial predators due to their differing ecology. Many such predators were forced to find different foods, with bears taking a lot more terrestrial prey in response. Ospreys declined due to being unable to hunt lake trout as fish specialists, whereas the generalist bald eagles took to eating threatened waterfowl with likely associated declines in them. Lagiacrus's indiscriminate fish kills likely take all age classes of fish from multiple species, and presumably kill other species due to localized boiling, or the current in the water too. This chaotic method of foraging may both crash fish populations and their ability to recover in comparison to other native predators, and force generalists like Uth Duna or pyrogills to hunt more terrestrial prey more inland, and may cause displacement of more specialist piscivores like Mizutsune entirely. In contrast, Uth Duna's selection for only large fish and large species doesn't harvest or destroy the fry, allowing the younger age classes to continually repopulate the top ones Uth Duna takes from, as well as leaving smaller species untouched for other predators like Mizutsune, pyrogills and harpios. The giant trevally are noted to be top predators of the waterways themselves, consuming lots of smaller species of fish. By depressing their numbers via predation, Uth Duna also allows the smaller species to thrive and in greater numbers, as well as the fry of other fish too. Thusly, in contrast, Uth Duna's predation indirectly subsidizes most of the other piscivores and ecosystem functioning in the forest rivers. In stealing the fish stocks of, displacing and direct predation of harpios too, Lagiacrus may result in further detriment to the forest. Mobile animals that consume aquatic resources, and then move inland, can often redistribute the nutrients, with bears providing a large and significant amount of nitrogen to boreal woodlands via salmon carcasses they leave in the forest after feeding. Harpios, by discarded carcasses and guano, may also provide notable subsidies of nutrients and nitrogen to the forest after feeding on the richness of the river. With the distances harpios can travel via flight and their potential for numbers, they may have major effects on much of the forest, as well as being potentially crucial for a location so regularly lashed by heavy rains that can leach nutrients from the soil. Lagiacrus's effect on the harpios, fish, and smaller creatures can provide an example of how one can destabilize an ecosystem by pulling the smaller Jenga blocks out from the bottom, rather than the dramatic action of knocking the big ones from the top, as is often envisaged. This may be present in the Old World too. The quest to hunt Lagiacrus in the flooded forest also mentions concern over fish stocks and Lagiacrus's impact on them, which may well be quite valid. Whilst the concern is economic over people's livelihood, for subsistence fisherfolk, the two are one and the same, where economy actually refers to such for the local people, and not the more modern usage invariably referring to rich people's yacht money. In Lagiacrus's video, I also suggested freshwater usage may be tied to gobel predation, especially in young individuals swimming upriver, to exploit this resource. As said in Gobel's video, gobel body parts are considered high cuisine, and local fisherfolk may make a fair amount of money from catching and selling them. Gobel may be included in these said fish stocks, and Lagiacrus that swim upriver to consume them may be as economically detrimental as eating the other fish as well. Uth Duna doesn't take these threats to its home lying down though, and readily engages with other large monsters in combat. These are likely mostly due to competition for shared resources, with Uth Duna having dietary overlap with all the monsters it fights with, assuming it also takes terrestrial prey like the occasional Kongolala or Delphodon. These are likely regular bouts of combat against Rathalos and Mizutsune, where Uth Duna flattens both beneath its bulk. But Lagiacrus is probably Uth Duna responding to a hostile invader that also dips its toe in Uth's waters. This factor of holding other monsters at bay may well make it popular with the local populace, and the Woodwards of the forest are the ones who refer to Uth Duna as Lord of the Forest, placing it above themselves in the hierarchy of things. Whilst they're not above a people's rebellion, and can try to take care of Uth Duna themselves when it causes trouble, they do also seem saddened by its death in the narrative, and as well as Lord and Protector, it's no doubt a monster that carries considerable cultural significance for them. I've mentioned before I think Uth is probably the poorest received of Wilds' apexes, and I do unfortunately think Uth Duna is a bit undersold in base Wilds. Being fought so early and having all of its cutscenes just showing it get folded, first by Olivia then by Arkfeld, do serve as a pretty poor handshake in trying to build up a monster, as rather Uth is the apex used to build up Arkfeld from the start. In comparison, Ray actually puts up a decent fight, gets a proper turf war, and then makes its death and revival cooler than most victories. Nuudra is canonically slain by Arkfeld too, but off-screen and in a text box, so it barely counts, and Jin is just flat out immune to it, so Uth Duna very squarely feels the weakest. There is nothing wrong with this, but Uth is also meant to be a wrestler, hence its squat design, the frills meant to look like a mawashi, and Fujioka's one-word interview describing it as such. This then explains Uth's abundance of turf wars and often body slamming in them, but the airs given to Uth in the story just make it feel a bit weak and forgettable. On top of this, there's Lagiacrus too. Lagiacrus in Wilds is essentially one big homage to Tri, and as such most of the focus is on Lagiacrus versus Rathalos in the mini-narrative. Despite this being Uth's map where it's Lord of the Forest, outside of a still decent turf war, Uth doesn't really get anything to do with this notable contender, or even with Mizutsune either really, with both being a chance for it to pull back some credibility. On top of this, Uth feels like it gels the poorest with its inclemency. Ray is at its most spectacular in the lightning when its own batteries fold out and it lights up the desert with its thunder strikes. Nuudra looks amazing in the blazing fire spring, and Jin just sort of does his own thing. But Uth just really feels washed out by the downpour. Its spectacular colours are muted, and it's not especially clear how it benefits with the forest that's already fairly flooded. Similarly, Uth's big ult attack is area locked, telegraphed 2 weeks in advance, and not hugely impressive. The first time I fought Uth, I missed it completely by accident, and didn't realise it had actually done anything. Much as I said in the rosters video, I do also believe Uth needs water combat to some degree, because it really feels like it struggles to sell itself properly, and water combat could be the answer to that. But with all of that said, Uth's theme is still phenomenal. All of the Monsters Inc.'s themes are, and the imposing opening and other aspects do feel like they have certain elements of Godzilla's theme in there. Indeed, all of the Monsters Inc. do have varying elements of the Toho about them in one way or another. Uth's fight is okay, and funnily enough I'd actually consider it harder than New, Ray, or even Gore in high rank. For a hammer main, Uth Duna just takes a hell of a lot longer to go down, and breaking the fins is always a bit of an ordeal, even if its own damage output is never especially that fearsome. But I also do like that. It feels good to have a distinctly bad matchup for some weapons, and to remember that those can still exist in 6th gen. Not you though, Hirobami. I think Uth would benefit from being a bit faster, and this would also reduce the floatiness of its animations. But at the same time, if Uth had realistic hang times and inertia, everyone would just be sobbing about it, so here we are. Design and ecology-wise, Uth is less contentious in that both are quite good. Uth is really quite unique among the Leviathans, going for a brand new style as a sort of fat, robust salamander that drags a lot behind it, rather than the megamouths or the more serpentine ones. The big, broad powerlifter's muscle gut and squat limbs sell Uth as something strong, and gets the wrestler idea across even if Uth's implementation doesn't. And the frills really do turn Uth into a new monster design-wise. When in the plenty, Uth in the forest does look pretty magnificent, and it's nice to see Uth hunting the fish as well. Uth is also very clearly based on an arapaima, a giant Amazonian air-breathing fish, which share Uth's distinctive jaws, are known locally as the redfish, are well known for leaping out of the water to feed or when startled, and also exploit the flooded forests too. It's a nice bit of inspiration, and really makes me think the developers do have a lot of desire to revisit certain maps they made in 3rd gen. The Windward Plains are reminiscent of the Sandy Plains, and the Scarlet Forest is bordering on identical to the flooded one. But again, I do think the flooded forest comes across as a lot stronger by being able to swim in it, even if just to fight Gobel and Green Plesioth, and at selling itself as the Monster Hunter Amazon, which I think both are based on to a degree. In both maps and the actual area, they're rainforests inextricably linked to the river that shares their name. But in Wilds we can't explore said river, and this also affects Uth as it feels slightly snipped from the rest of the map, and its inhabitants unlike the other monsters Inc., as the other forest dwellers that aren't rival Leviathans are all landbound with no aquatic ability. It really feels like the forest and the river are two separate sections, and the forest is full of other monsters like Dosh, Rathian, Rathalos and Lala, but Uth is the only one who really feels tied to the water. Overall, Uth is king of the river, but the court is empty. Thanks for watching, and thanks as ever to my patrons: Bonecrusher Hyena, Toxic Wolf, The Superest Duper, DJ, My Best Friend Glober, Samburgo, K. Sandom, Octavia of the Fifth Fleet, Nickname 3110, Kieran McCarthy, Flagon's Archives, Hui Hui, Jabin, The Belted Horned Warbler, Roberto Hernandez, Big Man Blastoise, Nathan Cross, Johnny, Oni, Tim Gojira, TeddyKGB, Insert Nickname, Waffle, Slashmaster101, Dapperaptor, Godzilla Prime 2, Original Username, Small Squid, LittenGamer111, Evilly, Howleth, Archelosaur Queen, Tommy Choi, Jacob Wilcox, Seth Fake Last Name, Dodecablos, and Bazugazu Bakuratsu Bakumatsu, who help keep the channel going with their generosity. A link to the Patreon is provided in the description below, and any amount is always appreciated. If not, a like, share or subscription is also a great way to boost the channel instead. Thanks to Kamen Rider Moten for creating the digital artwork and anatomy shots for this video, and to Iamthekaijuking for the Uth Duna skull, and finally to Archelosaurian for assisting in in-game dialogue. All helping creators have their links in the description where you can find more of their related work, including commissioning your own pieces from Kamen too, so please do check them out. With Uth now done, only Jin remains from the Monsters Inc., and it likely will be a while until Jin is covered, as despite being often requested, his ecology is very bare bones in the game, with also next to no lore or dialogue fleshing him out in that regard too. Maybe we'll need Wild's Ultimate to give him enough for a video. Even Uth itself is comparatively lacking in that regard compared to the riches Ray or New get as well. But hopefully this video still came out good enough, and for next time,